Hey, everybody, and welcome to the show. This is Liz joining you as usual from Central Virginia and the unceded lands of the Monacan Nation. And I'm so glad that you are here with me today. And if you are here seeking sacred feminine wisdom, first of all, you're in the right place. There are 5 years now of back episodes that you can go and explore. You may also want to check out my book, Home to Her, Walking the Transformative Path of the Sacred Feminine. It's available wherever you buy your books. It's also available on audio if you prefer to listen to me read to you. Yeah, if you're new here, one of the things that I've been explaining on more recent episodes is how my own understanding of the sacred feminine has evolved and changed over the years. And originally, it was a very spiritual quest that brought me here, but the longer that I have journeyed with this wisdom, I've realized how urgent and necessary and applicable it is in all areas of our life, even if that spiritual lens isn't the thing that draws you. And I think we'll get into this on this episode today, but one of the things that has been really clear to me is how these stories and histories and mythologies actually teach us a tremendous amount about women's power and how women's power might have looked in a pre-patriarchal time, how different it is, what an incredibly different paradigm shift it is to understand power from a feminine lens. And then most importantly, what does that look like in our own lives and how do we reclaim this? It's very hard to find this in a world that's been defined by patriarchy for the last 2000 plus years. So what does this even look like for ourselves? And this is why I think the sacred feminine can be so incredibly helpful for us. And to that end, I am offering a handful of mentorships to work with women who are interested in accessing their own power through this lens. It represents all the research that I've done in this area over the last decade, and then also a lot of the experiential work that I've gotten into too. It can be a little intense. It's not always for the faint of heart, but if this is something that appeals to you, then please do reach out. You can send me an email at liz@hometoher.com, or you can go to my website and book a discovery call where you can learn more. And I think that's all I got to say right now. Let's get on with the show. Okay, so my guest today, I absolutely love having fellow Womancraft Publishing authors join me on the show. I've had several join me. Womancraft is my publisher. If you're not familiar with them, please go check them out. There's just an incredible library of books. Lucy Pierce, the founder, has been on this show twice in the past. She's an incredible author herself, and it's an indie woman-based business in Ireland that is just very much on the same wavelength. So you will find lots and lots of great titles to explore there. And I'm so excited. My guest today is talking about a topic that I am deeply interested in and actually have been more scratching the surface with. She's got a lot of knowledge on this that I'm just beginning to open to. And so I'm excited to hear her share it with us today. So let me go ahead and introduce her to you now. Sophie Messager bridges worlds that rarely meet. A former reproductive physiologist with a PhD, she traded her microscope for holistic practices after experiencing the transformative power of an empowered birth. I can so relate to this. Her decade-long journey as a doula, birth educator, and author of Why Postnatal Recovery Matters deepened her exploration of the rhythms surrounding women's transitions. Now a holistic life transition mentor, Sophie guides women through significant life thresholds, from birth to perimenopause and beyond. Her unique combination of scientific expertise and spiritual insight allows her to serve as a compassionate space holder for those seeking to harmonize their analytical and intuitive selves. She's also the author of the new book, The Beat of Your Own Drum: The History, Science, and Contemporary Use of Drumming as a Path for Women's Wisdom, Health, and Transformation. She's joining us today from her home in Cambridge in the UK. Sophie, thank you so much for being here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a really long time now.
Thank you, Liz. I'm really delighted to be here myself.
Yeah. Well, I love to start. People who listen to the show regularly know that I usually start in the same place, and that is just hearing about people's spiritual background growing up. And in part, it's because I'm curious. And also, in part, I think it's because of this topic of the feminine. So many of us didn't get exposed to that in our childhood and in our transformative experiences growing up. So I'm always curious about, like, you know, what you had to leave behind, what were maybe the nuggets that were useful that pointed you to where you are now. So if that's okay with you, I'd love to start there.
Yeah, in fact, that's something I chose to talk about in the chapter about my story in the book.
Yes.
I grew up in France and I was brought up a Catholic. And to put it mildly, I don't really have good memories of from spiritual life as a Catholic. Because, in fact, as an adult, when I look back, I think it's absolutely horrendous because the image I got of God was a beardy guy that was constantly displeased with me. The priest would say things like, you must pray every day. So it was like the boring going to mass once a week. My parents dragged me to mass, and I remember in the mass, I looked for the time that communion would take place because it means that it would soon be over. French churches didn't have what British churches have, which is a corner for kids to have toys to play whilst the adults go through the process of the mass. The mass was tediously serious and boring. And the priest would say things like, you can't be a Catholic and not go to mass. He made us scratch something like that in a book that said that you can be a Catholic cannot go to mass. I was 8. I still remember knowing that it was wrong, but not having the words to object defacing the book because it was just this guy's opinion. Catholic priests, even today in France, are still not allowed to get married. There are no women priests. Back when I was a child, I wanted to be a choir boy, but girls couldn't be choir boys because I was told you carry the original sin, so you cannot be there in the front of the church, and such bollocks.
Yes.
And so many things that I was made to believe. So the underlying belief, because I didn't do what the priest said, pray every day, I remember being in my bedroom and often feeling there was this Victorian father beardy figure going like that, shaking their finger at me, going, you're not praying. How is that supposed to help people feel good about themselves? So, and then I was being told bullshit like the fact that going to confession made us feel lighter, which I believed as a child. And then when I became a bit older, in my early teens, realized it was because I was so stressed about it and I would make up sins, right? I would
Wow.
make up sins because I didn't feel I could share things I felt really embarrassed and ashamed about. So I would make up lighter things, like I said, bad thing about my granddad or crap like that. And then, of course, I felt relieved because I was so uncomfortable having to make these things up. And the lack of joy. So the one thing I remember, if there's one moment where I thought, fuck this shit, I must have been about 13. Because my parents were quite embedded within the Catholic community in the various cities we lived in. And so I went to catechism classes on top of going to the mass, but also like there would often be youth camps and stuff like that. And I was one of these camps, and I said to the priest, okay, so you talk about the joy in the mass, but I can't feel any joy in the mass. I feel joy in African American gospel choirs, in African American churches, but not in our. And so tell me about that. And the priest said, the joy's inside.
Mm.
And I knew it was bollocks. He didn't even try to engage with my question. Do you see what I mean? So I walked away. My brother walked away. It was quite interesting because eventually my parents stopped going. When I asked them more recently, why did you stop? They said, when we moved from Brittany, where they was fairly modern and actually dynamic priests, we moved to Normandy, and my mum said it was like you'd gone backward 100 years. And from time to time, when I find myself going to a wedding or a christening, and I just go in that space, and I thought, still the same. It hasn't changed. I've been to a wedding a few years ago where the priest talked again endlessly about you're sinners, sin this, sin that, the idea that you're almost born bad, so you can probably hear from everything I'm saying that I don't have a good relationship with Catholicism. I don't have a good relationship with Christianity. And then the other thing I noticed when I walked out was, well, there's nothing else. Back when I was growing up in France in the 1980s, when I dropped religion, there was no multi-faith churches like there are some in the UK. There was no non-denominated temples. So there was nothing. Even now, sometimes I talk to, just came back from going on holiday in France, and I went with a friend in a church, and we're both very energetic, sensitive people, and we were like, the energy is shit in here. I was like, yeah. But I was talking to my mom about that. She said that sometimes some churches have a really good energy, not all. And I felt that too. Like sometimes I've had vision in churches. But I find it very sad that once you left that organized religion that's the one that's predominant in your home country, and you find yourself with nothing. And
Yes.
so for me, the journey, one of the big aspects of the journey to the drum has been attached to other practices like the Celtic Wheel of the Year ceremonies. So 2 equinoxes, 2 solstices, and 4 other festivals in between. 8 in total. So every 6 weeks, having something where you tune into the energy of the changing season. And I find that reclamation that has come from the drum for me, very joyous, and
Mm.
like it's given me a deeply rich spiritual life that doesn't fit into any nice neat boxes, because I don't really want to call myself a pagan. I guess what I'm doing would be closest, but I don't feel that's who I am. I feel I've crafted my own religion. I belong to a group that do this kind of practices, and small groups, bigger groups. I do it on my own, and I feel like, hey, this is lovely. And my church, my cathedral, like we call it, my friend, is the woods, is
Mhm.
outdoors.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, and I mean, so much of what you say about the church, I can relate to. I think for me, it was, it's funny because I didn't have the rebellious side to me came much later. I think it almost landed for me more as bewilderment. Like, what? I don't get it. Like, I really want to feel things here and I'm not feeling anything. But one of the things I'm curious about for you, because I've had many people on the show now who were raised Catholic. I was raised Protestant, so very different. There's no feminine in that whatsoever. I mean, like, it's just like whether that was intentional or not, it's like they pretty much just scrubbed every last ounce of the feminine out of Christianity. But one of the things that I've heard from many people who are Catholic, and I'm curious if this is true for you, is that their first experience of the feminine was through Mary, like her presence and their awareness that whatever the priest was saying, that Mary was holding different energy. And I'm curious for you, sort of your path to the feminine, if Mary played that role or if she just came through as like this sort of whitewashed, because there is also that too, right? Where she's
I
just
can
kind of like,
feel that energy now when you talk about it, but
yeah,
from a
yeah.
sort of backhanded angle of going to places like Lourdes and places like that, but as an adult.
Yeah.
I don't have
Yeah.
any of that as a child. It wasn't there. It was irrelevant. Like, again, when I went to the church with my friend, I looked at Jesus on the cross and I said, who the fuck thought it was a good idea to have this guy with his like wound bleeding and his crown of thorn on the cross? Like, as the symbol of what you want to have prominent. The first thing you see when you go in a Catholic church is that.
Yes. I've heard people call Christianity a death cult for that reason. It kind of is.
So when you talk about Mary, she was part of the story, but almost like a push to the side. It was Jesus, God, and the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
The main, how do you call it in English? The main prayer that you say when you go to church. It doesn't say Mary in it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
The Lord's Prayer. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yes.
God is Son, and even the Holy Spirit is masculine.
Yes.
I've had friends it's really interesting because I can't wait to tell you about my relationship with the divine feminine. But I have friends saying to me they went to some grottos, some natural caves in France that had like Mary Magdalene apparitions in them, and they felt this really impressive thing. And then recently I went to a Buddhist festival in the UK in the summer, and there was a puja, a celebration of a particular Buddhist deity, which was female. And I'd never heard of this deity. And when we did this prostration thing, which I'd never done, but I thought I'll have a go, it was very joyful. That's the other thing I found very different is there's deeply spiritual Buddhist priests. Well, they're not called priests. Oh, I don't know if they're called priests, but it doesn't matter. But they also giggle and don't take themselves. There's a lightness to it. And I had a conversation with someone there who said, yeah, in the UK, religion is serious only. And I think that's what I felt was wrong with my French experience. But when I find myself prostrating in front of this, it was just a big picture of this goddess. I can't even remember her name. I was like, this energy came through me and I was moved to tears. And I was thinking, wow, that's completely different. It's possibly because I'm much more open to this now. But I was like, here I am in front of a picture of a goddess I've never heard about, and I feel her
Yes.
touching my heart.
Yes.
I don't remember ever having that experience as a child, and yet, as a child, I was hungry for experiences like that. There's something in me that's always seeked something beyond. All my childhood, I would know people that died before they'd been announced even to the rest of the family. Even when I was 2, my parents said they got really freaked out because, as a lot of people did, they would hide the death thinking we're protecting the child. And I can't remember it, but apparently when I was 2 and my great-grandma died, I spoke of her death, like saying she's not coming back, and people are like, eh. And there was always this sense of connection with something bigger than what I was being told, but this sense of being squished into a box that didn't belong, that I didn't feel right for me. And it took 25 years of exploration, of starting with doing Reiki, but the being at birth had a really big impact. And in the 10 years I worked as a doula, I've stopped now, but it's the being in the presence of the energy in the room at the moment a baby is being born. You can't be there and not feel that. It's so immense. And again, many times I find myself having visions of souls coming and going. I still do. So for instance, when somebody's about to die, which has happened to me recently, I know if that person's about to die because I have the same sensation inside of my body I used to have when I supported women through childbirth. At close to the moment of birth, do you see what I mean? There's something in the room. I call it liminal space. I don't know, that feels for me, those are two sides of the same coin. And I get this sensation inside that I'm there to help the process of the soul's passing.
I've had a death doula come on the show who said something very similar, and she said the same thing about, I think she was also worked in birth work too, and same thing you said about that
Yeah,
present.
and that's never been taught to me. This is through actual experiences. And when I started having those sensations, I started reading and trying to have conversation with people and find the very little been written about that experience, because again, in the same way that spirituality's been defeminized, the whole magic of birth has been reduced to some of its part. It's been reduced to a medical event. And the society as a whole completely ignores the fact that it's much more than, like some quote I've read, I bring souls through my vagina. What's your superpower? How we've lost sight of that means we've also lost sight of the enormity of what's happening in the room. And it's really interesting because death doulas have said things like, when somebody dies, don't rush to call the nurse. I've read around the topic. I've spoken to people who are specialists in supporting death doula, and now actually started to be part of a choir that's going to sing to the dying. I was like, yeah, the same thing that those doulas were saying, when somebody dies, just stay there. Do not rush to call the nurse. Do not just be. That's exactly how I felt when I was at the doula at the birth. The baby would be born, and I felt like a warrior protecting this liminal space. And the midwives, the medical professional, would be absolutely hell-bent on doing, putting a hat on the baby, taking the baby to weigh the baby, and getting the placenta out. And rather than being, hey, look, let's give these people half an hour of peace because that's the only chance they're going to have to have this magic. And then people are literally damaging the experience by doing and chatting, not being in reverence of what is the sacred moment.
I was just having this conversation a little earlier about, in the same context, about kirtan and chanting, sacred chanting, and how when you do kirtan,
I go to
there's
Kirtan
always,
too.
yeah, there's always that moment of pause, right? You've opened up the energy in between each chant. You stay in
To
that
absorb it.
moment because the divine is in the liminal space. And if you just skip past that, then you miss the opportunity for that to kind of ripple
It's
and
the same when you
integrate.
drum.
Yes. Well, so let's wait. So I wanted to, okay. So did the feminine come through you through your birth work? Like, how did you find, like, when did that really land for you? Yeah. Because I do
So
want to talk about the
I
drumming
think
too.
it's really important for me to acknowledge that for the first 40 years of my life, I was a product of the system. I was very masculine in my way of being. In fact, I was called a tomboy. In French, it's even worse than that. They call a garçon manqué, a missed boy, like you failed to make a boy. That's what I was called as a child. Because, I climbed trees, I hung out. All my youth, I preferred the company of men and boys to that of women, and then found women bitchy and catty and difficult, and then eventually got into the whole corporate thing, went into this idea that my corporate title was my worth, like up until basically became pregnant with my first child. I was about 35. I was completely functioning in. I remember a manager of mine saying, "Sometimes I wonder if you've got balls," and I felt pride that I'd been told like that. I felt it was a compliment. And then I became pregnant, and then I think the whole process. I have both of my births were very positive, empowering home experiences supported by a doula. And I think it really cracked something in me that started to rebalance what I wasn't even aware of. I was functioning like a man for most of my life. And down now, I'm still trying to rebuild, reclaim that. So the journey of reclamation for me, where when you were asking me the question, what's your relationship with the divine feminine? I'm still on this exploration, but the one thing that was very, very significant is a couple of years ago. So with a community of people I belong to in Cambridge, we do this Wheel of the Year ceremonies, Celtic Wheel of the Year ceremonies. We've been doing that for 5 years, and the last 3 years I have been involved in co-creating them. And a couple of years ago, so in Beltane, which is the beginning of May, fertility, time of the earth, I was actually chosen as May Queen for the year. So if it doesn't get any more and the funny thing is that happened in a year where I was really struggling with my mental health. So I was shocked that then the choosing is done with picking of cards. So it wasn't like people say it's going to be you. It's like women who felt called to step forward were asked to choose a card in a pack of cards. And I picked a card that was representing the May Queen. I was completely shocked. And the experience of that for me was really, really powerful to basically embody the symbol of being the embodiment of the divine feminine for a whole year. I never expected how much it would give me in my reconnecting with that energy, reconnecting with the earth and the changing season and energies of the earth. And so, I'm going to quote something that it's not I've read it in other books, but I think most of my life, until motherhood, I functioned like a sperm. Go, 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 get, and now I'm trying, and it's difficult to undo. That's why I'm saying it's still a process of being more like an egg.
I love that.
And the egg the sperm goes get the goal, which is how our entire society still function, doing
Yes.
of a being. And then the egg is just going, I'm ready, and wait for the sperm to come to the egg.
Yes, although I've also learned recently that
It's not
the egg is no, the egg is discerning. The egg is like sending out, like the egg has boundaries. The egg is
yes,
like, I'm
totally.
only letting in what is actually going to be beneficial to me, what is going to be the best match for me, which I love that part too. It's receptive but there's also, it's well boundaried.
And so what I feel, for me as a process is a process of reclaiming a form of balance, because we all have feminine and masculine energies within us.
Yeah. Yeah.
That what was really beautiful is that whole year. So every 6 weeks I would embody that persona, that archetype in the ceremonies. And then when the year was over, there's a man called Des, who's a druid in our community, and he basically created a death ceremony for me in the making. There was a pit dug in the earth, and we went to lie down to release our archetypes into the earth. And I had such a powerful experience of not releasing, but the earth speaking back to me, that they had to call us back because we'd gone so deep into the experience, we completely lost track of time. And then people were singing and then drumming, but they'd finished singing and drumming, and me and the making were still in our process. And the person kind of holding the space had to come and ding a bell at us to say, you need to come back. And the message I got from the earth is that, and again, that's something I've been still working with, is the balance of rest and doing, knowing that resting is safe. I think most of my life has equated doing with worth, being productive with my worth. The earth said, you need to come and lie down on me, like literally lie down straight on the earth. Like you need to do that as a practice. And I did for quite some time after that. And I noticed that when I'm feeling low, that drive to do and judge myself for not doing is still there. So it's you can't undo nearly 40 years of conditioning. So, like when I said I started when I was becoming a mother, it only started a process that I only really became aware of over the last 5 years. Now, the beauty of, the last 15 years I've been going through the perimenopause, I'm pretty sure I've crossed that bridge now. So medically, I only will tick that box in October, for I know. And that's really helped because my body's just been a lot stronger at telling me we're not doing this today. And before, when I was younger, up to maybe about 5 years ago, when I felt really like unable to do, I would mentally flog myself in wishing myself into a dynamic doing state. And that had the opposite effect. And it would result in me having this friction where I wasn't actually doing, but also wasn't resting
Yeah.
and feeling guilty and shame. And that's really, when I look back, all of the conditioning from society around that.
Yeah. You were, oh gosh, there's just a nugget. Oh, I think what came up for me when you were talking about the perimenopause journey to menopause too is, and I wonder if this feels true for you. I think for me, there's, and I would guess maybe for a lot, I don't know how other podcast guests would feel, but there are many of us that seem to have found the feminine later in
Yes.
life. We didn't find it in our 20s or
No.
whatever. So my own relationship with my cycles and with that experience, I mean, really only came online in my 40s, like, in my maybe my early to mid 40s. And so there's a little bit of like even a grief there too of like, oh, but I just now had the opportunity to rethink and re-experience this,
And
not
now
as
my
like a
cycle's gone.
curse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now it's leaving me. I just now got to, and not that it's not, I understand, ladies, if you're listening, you have pain through it. Like I get it. I
Yeah.
same, I have as well. But for me, there's also been like a beauty of like, oh, this isn't a curse. This is actually like, this is teaching me something. And then there's wisdom in this, and there's intuitive openings, and it's about to slip away.
No, I know when I went to I think it was 2014 or 15. I went to a workshop by Alexandra Pope of Red School.
Yes. They've been on the show. I'll put that in the show
Learned
notes. Yeah.
about, cyclic wisdom and then started to like apply the concept. I remember one of the women said something very significant. One of the attendees said, we were encouraged to draw each part of the cycle as seasons. And these women said, I used to think this was a pile of poo, talking about the bleeding, but now I think it's manure. And I felt like I walked out of there with like a much, like started to work with a different energy and the different archetypes of the cycle. And it was really helpful for me because especially what happened is I noticed that the first 2 days of my bleed, my body would not let me work. Like if I did not listen, the more I got into the perimenopause when I was still having regular cycles, my body gave me no choice. It just refused. And if I tried to plow through, I would pay the price the whole cycle. But if I called it a fuck day when I would see, when I was still regular, I would be like, yeah, I'm going to bleed there. And then I can't work. I would cancel everything that wasn't absolutely needing doing. And I would call it a fucking day. And often go to nature, often go to the river, and just basically, as soon as I would lean into that request for rest in my body, my energy would very quickly turn back into power. But if I resisted it, it would have the opposite effect. So it became so strong, I had no choice. But at this, I understood what my body was trying to tell me.
I love that. Well, let's talk about, I want to hear about the drum. And you know what I'm wanting to do for people who are watching?
Yeah,
I love my drum so much. I want people to see it.
yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
bring it over real quick because it's right here. But I want to hear about your journey to the drum. And this is
Yeah.
such an
So
exciting topic for me. So give me 1 second.
I have a drum too.
Okay. So this one was gifted to me earlier this year. It was hand painted in Costa Rica, and I love it so, so much. I have quite a relationship. So for those who are listening, I have a hand painted drum from Costa Rica that has got this just absolutely stunning snake on it, and I got a whole thing for snakes. But I love
Interestingly,
it
in
so
this
much.
pouch here, that's attached to this drum, that's a new drum associated with the launch of my book. There's a skin from a snake.
I love that. Okay. Oh, I love that so much. Talk to me, Sophie. Tell me about how the drum came into your life, your
Yeah.
journey.
And then in case I forget one of the things I want to say, I hope I get to talk about it again. But the way my brain works, I've got ADHD. So if I don't talk about one of the multiple stream of consciousness my brain is constantly downloading. Often I forget, but in the writing of this book, what I discovered is a practice which I call drum microdosing. So it's where you use the drum like you would use plant medicine. So no plant medicine, just the drum, but the same principle as you would microdose plant medicine, which is drum for 5 minutes a day, but with an intention for a cycle of, say, 4 to 6 weeks. And then each day, put a timer on for 5 minutes, just drum for 5 minutes, and then maybe journal for like a couple of minutes afterwards on how it feels before and after, or what's on your mind, or the intention that you want to, what you want to change or to bring more of in your life. It's as simple as that, 5 minutes a day. So interestingly, the drum came to me right at the beginning of my perimenopause, and I really think that's not a chance encounter. So I was in my first year as a birth doula after having been a scientist for 20 years, and I went to this retreat. It was a doula retreat. I only went there just to hang out with other doulas, and I was very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, very green in my new role and very excited. And I went to this retreat, and there was a workshop called Shamanic Work for Doulas, where this woman brought a drum and did a drum journey. And I remember being extremely skeptical. She described what she was going to do, and I was like, that's not going to work. And I had such a vivid, powerful experience. There was no going back from there. Like, I can still see the vision I had during the journey of past lives, stuff that nobody had told me about. Do you see what I mean? Of seeing myself in different women in different countries. And there was a real sense of power and being in the earth. In fact, one of the visions, I saw myself holding a bowl of earth, and I actually went and made the bowl of earth that's in my vision when I came back to Cambridge. I went to a chalk stream to get some clay. And so I came out of this and I was like, I want a drum. And I went back on holiday to France and told my mum I want a drum. And my mum said, well, I have this power in this, and I traditional Irish drum. It's spelled bodhran, but it's pronounced Bowran. And she said, would you like it? And she'd bought it in Ireland. And I came home with this drum. What is really funny is I just came back from France with another drum my brother gifted. And my collection is like 30 drums now. My brother gifted me yet another drum. So I came home with this drum. And what was really very interesting in the story of bringing this drum back is my brother is a professional musician. So he tried to show me YouTube videos of how the Bowran traditionally is played with a double-ended little wooden stick that's not got any padding on it. It's called a tipper. And there's this very special fast wrist movement that you need to do to play this. And I couldn't do that. And I was feeling really defeated. And I came home to Cambridge, and luckily one of my friends, a shaman, and I went to see him with my drum, and I said, I cannot play this drum. And he said, that the story is in the book, he said, well, what is it you want to do with this drum, Sophie? Would you like to play in an Irish band? Yes. And I said, no, I want to do some shamanic drumming. And he said, well, then you do not need to learn to play it this way. And so he showed me there and then how to make a bitter with a piece of felt and a stick and some cotton wool and then or some sheep wool, I can't remember. And the rest is history. And I'm really glad I had that experience. I talk extensively in the book about the constraint we put upon ourselves in a world where we've formalized any form of creative expression to be something only people who have trained can do. That's
Yes.
bollocks. Yeah.
Such a tragedy. I know.
It was so interesting because yesterday, so this is, the book is, as we speak now, the book is still in pre-order, is being formally released in 2 weeks. So yesterday I had to take my car to the garage to get something fixed. And I brought with me the stickers I need to sign for people to have like a signed copy of the book. And I was signing this thing that had basically overtaken the table where they're doing coffee in the garage. They told me to wait, and I just cleaned the table, pushed everything aside, and started signing the stickers. And then this man and his wife, who are basically the owner of the garage, came and said, that looks interesting. And started having this conversation, and completely unexpectedly, the wife of the owner said, oh, I've tried drumming once, but I wasn't very good. And I said, hey, that's not the drumming I do. The drumming I do, I said, come to my drum circle, which is like in half an hour from where the garage is. I said, I don't do this is not a djembe circle. This is not a circle where everybody needs to keep rhythm. It's a circle where you express yourself through drumming. So to go back in the past, I went I had massive imposter syndrome when I started because, again, I had this unconscious conditioning, and I see that in so many women who's come to the drum, the idea that I wasn't good enough and that I wasn't trained and I didn't have a piece of paper to say that I was allowed to drum. God, when I look back, I'm like, I'm glad I had that journey because it gives me so much empathy for a lot of the women who come to me. I've never drummed, they don't own a drum, and they feel this call, but they feel I can't because I'm not good enough. And they also feel really scared of expressing themselves. So my journey went from where I was with this to a place where now drumming is as normal to me as breathing and walking, because over the last 5 years. So what's really interesting is before we started recording, you told me you just turned 50. So when I turned 50 5 years ago, I was going to have a big party. I would say that up to that time, I still wasn't really feeling like I could call myself a drum woman, but I had started a drum circle in February 2020. I did 2, and then we got into lockdown. But I was going to have a big party for my 50th birthday, and because of travel restriction, I couldn't, because in May 2020, when I turned 50, you still couldn't go abroad or anything like that. So instead of doing the big family party I'd planned, I just contacted the women who had been coming to my drum circle, and I said, I turned 50 tomorrow, I'd like to start the day drumming in the woods. And 2 women came, and these women and I have been drumming once a week at dawn for 5 years now, in the same place that we first drummed 5 years ago.
Beautiful.
And it's mentioned in the book, both of the voices are in the chapter where we talk about that, where they tell from their angle what this does for them. And it's the most wonderful spiritual practice that I've ever had in my life. So from there, it grew very quickly, because once you develop a practice that is your own private practice, not something you offer to the world, when things reopened and I was starting to run my drum circles again, after having ran them online and stuff, and I realized I no longer needed any Excel spreadsheet with the timings of what I was going to do, and no longer needing a writing of calling the directions. I no longer needed any of that, because I'd been doing, in fact, the first 2 years, I think we did it twice a week. And so I just grew this natural practice from just doing it. And then the Wheel of the Year stuff started around the same time. And so now it's completely normal for me to drum. And one of the really important elements I think I need to mention is, at some point, I think it was 2019. So I started having this desire to drum at birth. It didn't come from anything I'd read or anything I'd heard. It just came from within. And so I started talking about that, and then ended up drumming at a friend's birth who I was doulaing. And then I was hired for that purpose by someone. I was specifically seeked out because I started sharing this on my website. And then it ended up being a thing. I'd already been doing it in the pregnancy and the postpartum, because I did ritual and mother blessing and postpartum rituals. But the birth stuff was really, really powerful. So when I decided to write this book, I actually decided to write from the angle of drumming for birth. And so I went back to the women I'd drummed for and asked them, how did it feel? And they all said, with different words, but they all said it gave me my power back. And when I talked to other people, other doula who drummed that birth, or the midwife who drummed that birth, Jane Hardwick Collins, who wrote the foreword of the book, she tells similar stories. They all said the same thing. They talk about having their consciousness ascend out as they listen to the beat of the drum, having completely pain-free contraction when they were really struggling before. The first woman I drummed for, she said afterwards, "Why didn't you do this before? I waited until she was pushing the baby out." Because there was still some element of can I, but it was a home birth. It was a very quiet setting. I just sensed that she was struggling, so I started drumming quietly in the corner. And afterwards, she said, "You should have done this before. It was so helpful." She said it felt like riding a horse. There was another woman who, when we moved from home to the hospital, she said once we got in the hospital, she felt that she'd handed her power back to the system. And as soon as I started drumming, but by then I felt completely confident doing it. It was in 2022. She said, as soon as I picked my drum, and that was in the obstetric unit of my local hospital. So I'd gone from home to birth center to obstetric unit. But by the time I drummed in the obstetric unit, I really didn't give a fuck. The first time I drummed in the hospital, I felt very self-conscious, and I purposefully didn't make eye contact with the midwife as I picked my drum. And there were 2 of us doulas drumming in that birth, and the other doula said, "You should have seen her face when you started drumming." the woman whose birth had drummed in an obstetric unit, she said, as soon as I picked up my drum, it gave her power back.
I love that. Well, and speaking to that, I love that you include this in the book and about I wonder if you could just speak for just a moment because
Yeah,
I know there's a lot to say, but just about the history of women as drummers. We don't know this culturally, right? Because we associate the drum with
right.
men, but actually in Lane Redmond, the late Lane
Exactly.
Redmond also wrote quite a bit about this too, but I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
So when people in the modern world, they think about drumming, and it's the truth. They think of a drum kit and they think of a man because only 1 in 100 drummers, as in like drum kit drummers, is a woman. But when you look at history, the Lane Redmond is a seminal book in the topic, but I found lots of other things around the same thing, which is that Lane Redmond's book goes into it's a very scholarly book, and it talks about the fact that women, when in matriarchal societies, women who were priestesses of the goddess used the drum as their tool to achieve a state of transcendence, to connect with the divine and to help other people do that too. And that makes a lot of sense because what we know from really cutting edge science. So there's so much science that the book has 2 chapters because you see from Womancraft told me this chapter on science is too long. You're going to have to split it in two. It's the third of the book. I can't, once a scientist, always a scientist. I don't reject that part of myself. I really like bridging the two. What happened is once patriarchy came along, especially with land ownership, and it became like land would start to be passed from father to son, and then object of powers were systematically removed from women. And it's not just then. You look at through history. So I've got a chapter on that where I've tried to give a potted history because there are much bigger books written by other people about that very topic, like Lane Redmond's book. I quote her extensively, where you see that the drums are systematically removed from the hands of women, systematically removed from the hands of men as well, because, you go through women's priestess moving into male priest and then all the objects of powers being removed. But it's always about control, because the theory I explain in the book is you can't control people who go into a trance-like state because they tend to question the status quo, which is why I believe that the trance that happens in birth is actively prevented to happen. And this is why the bringing the drum back is really powerful.
Well, this makes so much sense. Right. And yeah, I was just gonna say there's other things too, right? Like when you look at European history that were just systemic, like even just the practice of sitting out in nature, and communing with trees and communing with water, like even that kind of stuff was banned by the church, by local officials. That was seen as dangerous. And I think you're totally right. Like if you can have a relationship with the divine on your own through these,
Without the intermediary of the priest.
right,
Because again,
then the priests don't have power.
you can
Right.
only talk to God through a male priest.
Right. Right. Totally.
And what I want to speak to, like matriarchy versus patriarchy thing, because people always think that matriarchy would be women basically treating men like men treat women in patriarchy. Not at all. Like matriarchies are much more egalitarian. For instance, I was reading recently an article that said in matriarchy, there's no such thing as illegitimate children.
Of course not. Right.
And so the drum gets removed, in like 5000 BC, and then it gets removed over and over and over again as sort of one god religions, especially when I looked at Europe, the whole process of like when the church spreads through Europe, the famed text that said that the drum is a symbol of the devil's pomposity and heathenism, and then there's the burning of witches, and then there's what I see. And I've interestingly seen other people talk about it since I finished writing the book, is that my theory became really quickly that the only cultures in Europe and the rest of the world managed to hang on to those Germanic traditions were the ones that were remote enough that the colonization couldn't get to them. So the Sami in Northern Europe, the people in Outer Mongolia, people in sort of mountains in South America. Because the other thing that's really interesting is drumming disappeared really quickly as a way to change consciousness, because you can't, when they are colonization process that ban the practice of any shamanic practices, you can't drum discreetly. So Jeff Strong, who I interviewed in my book, was an American drummer and clinical scientist who's been studying drumming and the effect on the brain since the 1990s. He says that, Native Americans moved from like using the drum as a consciousness changing tool to using, say, peyote. because you can't do peyote discreetly. You can't do drumming discreetly. And I've heard other people say that's true in Africa, that's true in lots of other places, that it accelerated the erasure of the drum. Because when people were not allowed to practice, they found other ways.
Yeah, that makes
You can't drum and not be overheard.
true. Wow.
Yeah. So we carry that. So when with the problem is, I think that why women feel so scared of drumming is because we carry that ancestry that meant we could have been killed. In fact, in living memory, there's still example of people having been killed in some parts of Northern Europe for practicing shamanism, and in Mongolia as well. That is not that far away, that far ago, that we still. So that we carry this layers upon layers of ancestral trauma, especially in the case of women. I mean, it applied to men as well, the colonization and banning from the church, but it goes further. Do you see what I mean? In many, many, many generations of knowing that you can't do this and be safe.
Yes.
And
Well,
then
and
if you
I
add that to the modern fact that as women, we still carry also today the sort of idea that if you be a good girl, you need to be quiet, to don't make too much noise, and you're still labeled as hysterical. And so the
yeah,
combination of the two is no wonder that women find it really scary to bang a drum.
absolutely. It makes so much sense. And I think the good news to me, and when we are trying to reclaim feminine power and feminine wisdom, is like it's actually the hard work, and I wanna know if you agree with this, but to me, it seems like some of the hardest work for those of us that are living in Western cultures and we have the kinds of freedoms that our ancestors didn't have. Like, how lucky are we that we can pick up the drum or do this? But a lot of the hard work is the internal work of like, allowing ourselves to take the step towards the thing that maybe seems a little bit out of step with society. But
Yeah.
you can choose, maybe you can choose to take it easier when you're bleeding. You can choose to go outside and commune with nature. You can choose to pick up a drum and say, I don't know what I'm doing, but I trust enough in myself. I'm going to try. I'm going to work through the fear or the stories of the self doubt. We are able to do that. And so I don't know if you agree with that, but it seems to me like that is some of the most challenging work, is to just say, yes, I can. I can do that.
And
Yeah.
I think it's a really important part to acknowledge the weight of expectation of culture, like the patriarchal,
Yes.
the sort of layers upon layers upon layers of conditioning. And what I also feel very grateful I have is when I first heard somebody say I do drum healing, my response inside my head was, what's that bullshit? That was like 15 years ago. And so I came from that. So sometimes when I started running drum circle and then we got into this beautiful communal trance, and I would imagine what my old self would have done if she'd walked into a space like that, would have gone like. So it's really nice to be able to hold both sides and go, oh yeah, I understand what it feels like for people who are new to this, why it feels unsafe, why it feels scary, why it's so important as well. But I'm very grateful I have had both experiences and not came from an angle that it was easy right from the start. And it's really interesting because one of the things I also talk about in the book is that the most powerful experience of all is when you make your own drum, because you really work your own birth history or your own life history through the process of making the drum and encountering the medicine that you actually need to make from making
Yeah.
that drum. And then that drum will carry that medicine, the medicine that you need. And I also yet sense that there's a lot of appetite from women to want to go into banging a drum, to want to go into drum circles, to feel this pull. It's like when I first witnessed this process, in 2013, I remember feeling what women have told me that they felt, which is like, this feels like I'm meant to be doing this. It's feel like it's normal. There's this weird pull between this weird stretch between thinking, oh yeah, that's actually something that I've never seen before, but that's also something that I feel resonates in my, call it past life history, cellular memory, whatever you want to call it. I think people feel that. And that's why people still respond to the drum in that way. Like lots of women come to my drum circle, say they don't really know why they came. They just felt this pull, but they can't really, use
Yeah.
rational thoughts to explain it.
Yeah, well, and I love that, and I cannot believe how fast this conversation has gone. Like, I don't even want to put a pause on it, but we need to. But I also feel like that's a good maybe that is a good place to stop. And so if this is resonating with you and you're feeling the call, how can you just say yes? Like, and you know, if making your own drum, like that's a little advanced for me right now, although I think it could be in my future, to just start where you are, right?
In the book, there's a whole chapter that talks about choosing and buying a drum, ranging
Perfect.
from
Yeah.
really low cost, like buying a second-hand Baron, and then telling people that actually I would really encourage people not to follow any rules, not to go and train, but just to play intuitively. And then if they want down the line to go and experience it with other people and stuff, but I think to trust that you can, I think that's the most important thing. That was my path. My path was I was given no guidance, and I actually practiced on my own for about 4 years before I went and actually got some formal training. I got to train into channeling something called Reiki drum, which is channeling Reiki through the drum, and giving permission to people that they don't need any. Like the first sound you heard in your mother's belly was a heartbeat, and you have a heartbeat inside of you, and so just pick your drum and beat a heartbeat. I don't think there's a right rhythm and a wrong rhythm and any of that, because that's not the kind of drum circles I run. That's not the kind of drum circle I go to. It's intuitive first. That's the most important part. Trust that you'll find your way. Yeah, I really encourage people to either listen to shamanic drumming or go to a drum circle or get a drum. Like I said, they are very affordable. Starter drum, like second-hand Baron and synthetic drums. Like there's a brand in the state called Remo that makes very affordable shamanic synthetic drums that are really good quality. I have one because when you play the drum outdoors in the cold UK weather from like October to April, I can't use a skin drum because it's too damp and wet and cold.
Yes.
And so it just, if it calls you, follow that. I've got an article on my, as well as a chapter on the book, I've got an article on my website called How to Choose and Buy a Shamanic Drum, because I wanted to say to people it's not as complicated as you think. The one theme across the book that I really talk about, which gets my goat, which is when people go to a typical, say, a Facebook group and they say, if I want a drum, what should I get? And other people are going to tell them what's right for them. I don't believe in that. I go, well, what would you like to do with this drum? Like, what's your budget? What kind of, do you prefer to have a skin drum or a synthetic drum? That's why I wrote this guide, and that's why I wrote that in a chapter, because I really hate the idea of a prescriptive approach to anything. It's
Yes.
the opposite of what we're trying to do when we allow we want to encourage women to tune into their own wisdom. We
Yes.
do that by saying this is the right way to do it.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, listen to yourself. Listen to yourself. Read Sophie's book, The Beat of Your Own Drum. It's beautiful. Go check it out. It's wonderful. And Sophie, I'm so grateful for your time. This was amazing. It flew by. I appreciate what you're doing so much, and it's been really meaningful to me. It's really inspired me, you know, pick up this drum more often. So I'm grateful to you, and yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really grateful helping spread this message to more women. This is what it's all about.
Oh, absolutely. And thanks as always to all of you for listening. I'm so grateful for you for tuning in. If you like this show, please do subscribe to it, give it a favorable review. You don't even have to write anything. I don't know how it works on Spotify, but on Apple, you can just, you know, hit your 5 stars and move on with your day. And it helps other people find this information. And yeah, if this resonates with you, you know, in addition to go and pick up a drum or, you know, feel into that, pass this episode along to others that might appreciate it. And until next time, I hope you take such good care of yourself and yeah, tune into that own beat of your own drum within.
Mm.
And I'll be back with you again soon.